Here's brass wisdom to explain why it would not be a bad thing if religion were created to control people.
Hello there everyone, I am Mr. Brass. Today I'm going to be tackling anti-theism, and this will be a part of a series of videos I do every now and then, where I go after anti-theistic arguments. Now first off, let me define anti-theism. For this task, I'm going to use two atheist sources just so I don't get accused of using biased sources. According to J.D. Brucker in Reason Over Faith, Anti-Theism in the Case Against Religion, anti-theism is the active protest to religious organizations of all different faiths.
I actually find Brucker's definition to be a little weird, because not all different faiths are theistic, so using the term anti-theism to oppose them all seems a bit conflationary.
And in the second defining of anti-theism, this is done by the atheist's most trusted source for information, Rational Wiki, which they define anti-theism as the belief that theism and religion are harmful to society and people, and that even if theistic beliefs were true, they would be undesirable. Now with that out of the way, I am going to go after an anti-theist argument. Anti-theists say that religion was a tool invented to control people.
I imagine some anti-theists say this, but this idea is far from inherent to anti-theism. I'm not an anti-theist myself, but even if I were one, I wouldn't believe that religion was necessarily invented to control people. If you read books like Karen Armstrong's A History of God or Robert Wright's The Evolution of God, you will see compelling evidence that theism started out when people made the inference that the world is controlled by a conscious entity or conscious entities, and that we can bargain with these entities. I don't think it was originally cooked up by people looking for a means of controlling others.
This is done as a way of showing the malevolent nature of religion. Here is George Carlin, aka a man atheists herald as their champion philosopher,
Citation needed,
even though he, funny enough, denied being an atheist. Here is his argument.
About 5,000 years ago, a bunch of religious and political hustlers got together to try to figure out how to control people, how to keep them in line. They knew people were basically stupid and would believe anything they were told, so they announced that God had given them some commandments.
Now, I being the generous man I am, I have gone through the trouble of putting this argument from anti-theist in didactic form, from which it will be made to look like this. Premise 1. Things that were invented to control people are bad. Premise 2. Religion is a thing that was invented to control people. Conclusion, therefore religion is bad.
Carlin didn't say or even imply that things invented to control people are bad, per se. What he said was that hustlers created religion to control people. This at most implies that things made by hustlers to control people are bad. And again, I don't agree that this is how religion originated. However, I do think that shortly after religion was created, hustlers realized that if they could convince people that what they wanted was what a god or gods wanted, they would be able to control people. Religion is still exploited to this end.
Now, with that out of the way, I think this is a stupid argument for the following reasons. 1. The first premise isn't true because one can simply ask, what does the negative origin of something have to do with its current benefits?
That theism is used by hustlers to manipulate people into obeying them is not a problem with its origin. It is a permanent and therefore current danger of theism.
Just because an idea has dark origins doesn't mean it can't be beneficial or be retooled into something good. For example, a lot of wedding traditions have dark origins. Bridesmaids were originally like bodyguards for brides, and the purpose of the best men was to prevent the bride from escaping, and a whole lot of more wedding traditions were simply ways to ward off spirits. Now, does the fact that there are wedding traditions with dark origins mean that wedding traditions in of themselves are bad? Obviously not, as the meaning behind these traditions have changed.
If they were still used for that purpose, as theism is still used for the purpose of manipulation, then this would be a current danger of using them. I don't think the best man at a wedding being used to keep the bride from escaping is anywhere near as common as theism being used to manipulate people for this to be a fitting analogy.
So a religious person could grant that religion has its origins in control, but it doesn't mean that it applies anymore, and it has benefits that overrule that.
The problem is not that this is the origin of theism. Again, I don't even believe that it is. The problem is that you see hustlers using religion to manipulate people all the time. It is a current problem, not an origin problem.
This is an extension to the first one, although to a slightly different degree. Now, while Rational Wiki's definition covers it, I will say it anyway because anti-theists overextend this argument into the validity of religion. If the argument becomes because religion was made this way as a way of controlling people, that therefore religion isn't true, that is to commit the genetic fallacy.
It would commit the genetic fallacy if you weren't committing a straw man fallacy. That religion isn't true is not even a claim inherent to anti-theism. The Rational Wiki definition says that it is the position that religious beliefs are bad even if they are true. You don't even have to be an atheist to be an anti-theist.
It could be possible that because a religion is true, it had to control people, because not doing so would result in a bad outcome. 3. The anti-theist raising this likely isn't going to be consistent and apply this across the board. One can make the argument that schools and governments were invented for controlling people, but would anti-theists recommend that we dismiss governments and schools on the same ground as they do religion because of that? Clearly not.
Well, again, you're assuming that because Carlin implied that hustlers using something to control people is bad, that he believes all methods of control are bad, which just doesn't follow. Although I'm sure you can find many anarchist anti-theists who do in fact believe that any and all methods of control are bad.
4. The Hell Stipulation. The idea of hell is often used as evidence for control, but is fear of punishment always a bad thing? Isn't society guilty of this as well by having a prison system where you are threatened to be stripped of your rights if you don't obey a current law, which atheists typically agree is a subjective opinion of people? Are parents bad because they give rules with the intention of disciplining the child if not followed? Anti-theists also typically make the assumption that hell doesn't exist in order to add on the fact that it lies to children, but they don't back that claim up. If we made the assumption that hell exists, then it would be foolish not to warn people about it.
If hell exists, I agree that warning people about it is not a bad thing necessarily. However, even if there is a hell, hustlers using it as a means of controlling people is still a bad thing.
It really just overgeneralizes. One can reasonably believe that some religions were created to control people, but all religions? That is a harder stretch. Jesus himself was a first-century Jewish rabbi who preached a message that was controversial to authorities at the time and died for it. He hardly seemed to be the type of guy trying to control people. Buddha was a prince who gave up materialistic desires to live a simple life and taught people as such. Hardly seems like the guy who was power-hungry.
It's a harder stretch to infer that this belief is inherent to anti-theism. You're arguing with a stand-up routine as if it is a peer-reviewed expounding of the anti-theist position.
6. The phrase which is taken as self-evident, aka religion was invented to control people, really just commits the bare assertion fallacy. Really, there is no evidence given for the saying, and people who say it generally expect you to take it as true automatically without question.
I really doubt you are going to find many, if any people, even anti-theists, who have studied the history of religion who make this assertion.
7. Lastly, it presupposes an objective standard for morality without any justification.
Again, you haven't presented an anti-theist making the argument that just anything that is made to control people is bad per se. At most, you showed someone implying that hustlers using something to control people is bad. Sure, that's subjective too, but do you reject such a notion? Is it your opinion that hustlers using religion to manipulate people is not a bad thing? Or do you believe that nobody is hustling others using religion? Do you think that Peter Popoff, the guy with the magic water, or Creflo Dollar, the guy who wants his flock to buy him a new plane, are on the up and up? I agree that religious communities convey benefits, but they are also extremely vulnerable to shysters, and that's probably the biggest reason why anti-theists oppose them. It's not because of their origin, it's because of the damage they often currently do. everyone who helps me out on Patreon. You're a big help. Thanks so much.